Heads are on, torque down, tinware is on, no pushrod tubes in yet. Next things are oil cooler, oil filter, we reuse the old one for the moment, I'll explain why, and oil filler tubes. Now, oil cooler, obviously it goes on sideways. Now then, a couple of things here. Make sure it's all clean, make sure that you have repaired any damaged things. Don't mess around taking this off because it makes them leak, I've found in the past. Now you've obviously got to use a little something to hold these in. I suggest you just use a little bit of burnt blue, just a drop, don't go mad, and then yeah, that'll just hold it in. And then all it wants to do is hold the seal nicely in place while you slide gently. Get a better view this way. Slide gently, take your time, don't force. Hopefully all the studs are all nicely lined up. There we go. And then it fits into place and you just hold it shut with your fingers, and it's got specific washers and it has a little lock washer. It's just to hold it on. There, that's not going anywhere now. Now this gets torqued down to a mere 8. Where are we? It's a very low one. Oil cooler dots. There we are. 8 Newton meters, 6 foot-pounds. So there's 8 Newton meters on the 10. That's just caught. 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 Now make sure everything looks right. It's looking nice and neat and tidy because you've got to be able to get the tinware that goes in here. A bit of a sketch sometimes. Right. Torque it down. There we are, and that's that. Now we can put the oil filter on. Now why are we putting the old oil filter on? Because 2 reasons. Number one, that when eventually we start the engine, I would prefer to run it for a quarter of an hour on the old filter before fitting a new one. And number 2, it's handy if you have the filter in place and so on and all this, because you've got to get the tinware and the exhausts on. And just makes life that little bit easier. Okay. So now is quite a good time to fit the oil cooler tinware. It does go in. There we are. It helps if you've also cleaned all your threads M6 after painting, and then assembly is that much easier. Okay, so now we're going to fit the oil filler tube, bolt on the back. Remember, lift up the washer so that the screw fits. So that's the pipe put on. You make sure that the washer is moved well up, and it has to be set to, here we are, oil filler tube nuts, 20 Newton meters. Newton meter stick. That's one. That's two. Do it again. There you go. Okay, so now we're going to fit the petrol pump. We'll talk a little bit about the petrol pump on the CU version of the Type 4 engine. It goes on here, and it's run by a shimmy little shaft pushrod that runs on the very, very end of the camshaft. Now, you may say, well, it's a bit of an odd place to put a fuel pump. Well, it is an odd place to put a fuel pump because the Type 4 engine, of which this is a derivative, was always fuel injected, and this was a rather picturesque solution. Anyway, it has its little spacer, it has its gaskets, it has its push rods, and it has, the best thing is to have socket caps because they're very difficult to get to. These have been homemade, I notice. The ends are pretty skanked. Just to show you a little tip on these. Look, this is the dirty end, that's the clean end. You can see it's been in the engine oil. That finishes off smooth. That, I can feel a tiny burr on there. So this is a high mileage engine. Anyway, we're only fitting excuse me, we're only fitting the fuel pump for engine test purposes because there is already an electric fuel pump in the vehicle, and this is the blanking plate that would eventually be going over it. Okay, so I'll get that set up for you now. Right, so that's the fuel pump on. Just give it a little tweak. The interesting thing about this fuel pump, it's one of the rare Volkswagen flat cooled engines, flat air cooled engines, that you don't have to grease the fuel pump before you put it on. Normally the fuel pump's up here somewhere, and you always have to grease the fuel pump, which everybody forgets to do, of course, and then pushrod wears out. There we are. Anyway, so that's that done. That's basically the holes. Now we're going to look at, I hope you can see through here. Look, I've got quite a good effect. I'll wave my camera up and down a bit and see if we can get this to work. You can see through the cylinder head down into the cam followers. So the next thing we're going to do is fit the pushrod tubes. Okay, so here we are discussing push rod tubes. Now then, how does all this work? Here is an old push rod tube, and if I've got my props sorted out, I've got a push rod. Now then, what happens is that the push rod sits in the middle of the cam follower. It's a hydraulic cam follower, and it's got a little hole in it, and there's a hole there and a hole there, and the oil gets pumped up and it goes to the rockers. Now then, so far so good. This is classic Volkswagen flat 4. Now then, the problem occurs when instead of the traditional accordion scrunch Beetle style and CT style and water boxers style and so on, they insisted on using this system, which has a seal on either end, and it goes in that far, and then it's held in place by a Wongley spring, which is not a very good idea, but there we go. Now the problem is that here are the new tubes, here are the new gaskets, big gaskets, little gaskets. Now the gaskets, the rubber rings, contain a great deal of silicon. This helps them last a long time. And so the secret sauce when you're fitting these is to use a little bit of plumber's silicone grease, and it just makes them slip in, because the seals are very fragile, and if you force them in, they will tear. And then you can also say that, you know, this has had a terrible life. No wonder it was leaking all over the place. Look at that. Okay. That's it, so I'll get that set up then. Here we go. So, little dot of silicone grease. No more than that, just a little bit, just to make it very, very supple. Don't. Okay, so here we are fitting the push rod tubes. Right, seals have been greased with silicone grease, as have the entrances here and here, and it's all nice and clean. And we've also taken a bit of old school here, find where the seam is, where it's been seam welded, and mark it on the opposite side, and that becomes the underside. It's a bit old school, but might save an oil leak. These are a bit reputed to a leak. Let's start lining everything up, and that should just about push in to say there. And then you take the old tube, take your time, get it right, and then that's it. They'll go down to the same depth. There we are. Okay, well, I'll finish that off and see you later. Right, so that's the push rod tubes in, like that. And so we might as well put in the rocker gear and the Wongley spring. So there we go. Okay, so fitting the push rods into the push rod tubes and putting on the rocker gear. Okay, the push rod goes down, and you want to make sure that it goes in the middle, there it goes, of the cam follower. I would suggest that you have a strong LED lamp just to confirm, because you will be checking it again and again. Right, this is the rocker gear. Comes in two parts, which is useful in one way and not so useful in another. But anyway, and before you fit the rocker gear, obviously you must have all the push rods in place. You want to make sure that these screws and nuts are running smoothly. So here we have the screws and nuts just gently set in the vise. Nothing. Now sometimes you can need quite a lot of effort to come undone, but I've undone these already for you. Right, and then you want to make sure that these screws can run backwards and forwards smoothly. Now, another thing to bear in mind, it doesn't have to be done at once. It doesn't stop us from building up the engine, but I think we're going to order some new screws. Look, you see, look, that's the heads of that's gone now, and so on. So, but they can be fitted afterwards. Okay, now I'll put that down. And hit pause. Right, so we take this one off. Because this is what I want to show you next. Take that out. This is the famous Wongley spring, right? and they're handed left and right, and the left has got the curve on it. Can you see it's got a curve? And the right has more of a right angle on it. And its job is to hold in the end of the pushrod tubes, locking into little tiny notches there. And believe it or not, it fits under the rocker bar. Right now, these are not fun things to work with. You can buy new ones, and if yours are destroyed then or missing, you must have them. But here is my I'm too old to struggle, so you know what you do is you have a bit of copper pipe, 10mm diameter inside, say about 36mm long, something like that, 2 washers, and the 7mm nut. Yeah, there is all 7mm. And what you can do is you can just pinch it in place so that you get this one right, and then you put this rocker set on, and then you can undo that, and then you can struggle and put the other rocker set on, and it makes life a little bit easier. Anyway, I'll show you how that's done. So drop the push rod in, and you can use the torch to make sure you've got it in right. There, you see, it's in its little setting. See if I can pick that up on the camera. Can you see? Right, you get both of them done, right? Then, and now we've got the rockers prepared. Now be careful, there's a left and a right. Look, the right hand one has got the long bar on the right hand side, and the left hand side one has got the long bar on the left hand side. Couldn't be simpler. Oh, and the slots go to the bottom. So now you push the rocker bar down, and once you get it about this far, you hook up the top end of the push rod. Alright, the top end of the push rod goes up there, and then you can now put nuts and washers on and start to bed it in and make sure that you've got your springs nicely captive. So now you can start to wind the rocker bar into place. Make sure you don't lose your push rods. Alright, we'll start again. Okay, so that is just all nipped up tight. The spring is in place, not torqued down yet, and I've backed the screws off sufficiently to get as much valve clearance as I want. And what you do is, just to get a rough setting, see if I can line it up with the camera, let you see if you count, say 2 threads down from the end of the screw head, 2 threads down, and then if you wind that in, that's going to be somewhere near your valve setting. I don't know where I am in the cycle, obviously in the stroke, but it doesn't matter, just to give you some sort of a wild approximate setting. Okay, now we have to remove this spring, the keeper post, set this spring up, and do the same thing the other side. There we go. There we are. So here's the other side of the Wongody spring. It's all holding the thing in place, and the push rods are central in the cam follower. Okay, so now I'll get the next bit on. There we are. The push rods are connected into the tappets, and then these have all been slacked off. Put the 7mm nuts on with wavy washers and tighten it down by hand. Just nipping up. Just nipping up. There's your valve clearance. Okay, it's just hand tight, no more. It's just to give us an idea of where we're going. Okay, same principle. 2-3 threads, just go down and touch the valve. Okay, so that's it for this side. So I'll now go and do the other side. Bye for now. And then finally for this evening, just a trial fit of the exhaust heat exchanger. Just to straighten out the studs, you have to wongle them a little bit. Oh, here's the plate. One of these ones is made of unobtainium, one side, and this is just to see that everything fits nicely. Well, hello again. So we now have the barrel and heads assembled, and so what we're going to look at now is setting the static valve timing. Okay, now then, in order to be able to do this, all I have done is just gently put the turbine on. It's just holding on, it's just to show, and the flywheel is just nipped up, not tight because we haven't done the end float check yet or anything like that. Now then, the distributor drive is, as you can see, offset, right, so that we can see. So when we drop the distributor body in, there we are, so it's sat down, the shaft is engaged and the tip of the rotor is pointing to the center. I call that pointing to number 1. Okay, now we are at top dead center. That is to say that we can look in. Oh, it's going to flash on me now. There we are. You can actually see the piston. That's the piston at the top, and it's coming down. So that is top dead center, which on a Type 4 engine and on a Beetle engine happens to be the center line of the case, which is dead handy. And then where the bolts go into the flywheel, you can just use that as your reference point. Okay, so you mark 0 and 180, and then now that you've got it all right, that's to say the valves are closed, the piston's up, the distributor's there, the flywheel's there, then you can mark your top dead center on the fan. Why? Because they don't usually have one marked. They had a Hall sensing device on the flywheel, and the Volkswagen used to hook them up and that would set it. So here we are. Now this is at 0, and then when the timing, the dynamic timing, is set to 8 degrees or thereabouts before top dead center, so we'd expect to see it here going tick, 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 when I've got my strobe lamp on it. And then when you rev it right up, you come around to about 22, 24 degrees when you've got lots of power on. Right, now then, next thing. Okay, static timing demo. 0, 0, 0. Little bit of oil in the bores, piston up the top, valves slack. So what we do is we just get it to touch, adjust the screw, just get it to touch by hand, no more. Give it a little nip up, right? Because what we're going to do is we're going to just set these at contact, and then later on at contact plus a little bit. Why do we have to do this? Because these are hydraulic tappets, and so consequently they're normally filled with oil, and there is no gap, not like on a Beetle engine where you set your valve clearance. Now the problem is that while this one, for example, has still got oil in it by the feel of it, this one has gone squishy, you see, because it's leaked down. It needs to pump up with oil. So two things. First one, it will rattle like anything when you start it up until when you first start the engine, it'll rattle like anything until the tappets fill up. It can take up to 20 minutes, believe it or not, for the first startup. Anyway, so just do them contact. The other reason you do them contact and no more is so that you don't accidentally go too far and so that the valve is open, or just enough open to lose pressure and you get no compression, and you think, oh, I've broken it all, and so on. Now, here is your handy tip. Because this fires 1, 4, 3, 2, yeah? 1, 4, 3, 2, going round that way, okay? We can look at it, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, if it was going round the other way. So, anti-clockwise. So, if you stand in front of number 1 cylinder, with your faithful screwdriver, you're marked at 0, you have set your first 2 valves on number 1 cylinder. Okay? You now, in front of number 1 dot, pull the flywheel towards you until you come round to the 180-degree mark that you have set, and you can now adjust number 2. Exactly the same, just to see, hang on, to prove I'm not making it up. Look, it's just contact, right. Round we go again, half a turn. Okay, now you walk round the engine, it's not far, and you go and you do number 3, which is this one. So dunk, 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 same thing, number 3. Then you walk back round the engine again, seriously, and then you go half a turn towards you again, and now you walk back round the engine. It's good exercise, all this. You walk back round the engine and you can do cylinder number 4. You see, it's just touching, no more. Okay, and then you bring it back round to 0, so that your rotor arm is that way, that's on 0, that's on 0, you can see the piston, and your rockers are relaxed off. There we go. So that was how to set your static valve timing. You can go around and do it again a couple of times. It doesn't do any harm. Then what we're going to look at next is doing the rear and front crankcase oil seals.